For over a century, this bronze statue stood right in the middle of town. Everyone thought Captain Silas Thorne was a hero who went down with his ship. But that entire legacy is built on a really dark lie. The real story was supposed to stay buried at the bottom of the ocean. At least until someone found this weathered leather journal hidden on a reef. What's written inside completely exposes the guy as a monster. Picture this. It's midnight in 1882. You're standing waist-deep in the freezing waters of the North Atlantic. The ship's hull is screaming, and you're trapped in the dark with 39 other terrified people. Arthur Pendleton is a 22-year-old ship's clerk. He's pushing against this massive oak door, begging the crew on the other side to open it. The water is rising fast, and everyone is just screaming for help. But then, over all the chaos, Arthur hears something sickening. It's the heavy, metallic scrape of an iron deadbolt locking into place. The crew isn't trying to save them. They're sealing them in to drown. How does a captain just condemn 40 people to die like that? Well, we gotta rewind a bit. So, Captain Silas Thorne was this incredibly arrogant guy, totally obsessed with his own reputation. Arthur managed the ship's logs, so he knew all the dirty secrets. The ship was dangerously overloaded with illegal cargo to line the captain's pockets. Even worse, 3 of the 4 lifeboats were completely rotting away. Arthur actually warned the captain about the lifeboats before they even set sail. But Thorne just laughed in his face and threatened to fire him. The guy honestly believed the ocean would just bend to his will. But the ocean doesn't care about a man's pride. A massive, unpredicted storm hit them out of nowhere. The waves were absolutely crushing, but Thorne was too stubborn to slow the ship down. Right before midnight, the sluggish ship got caught in a massive wave and slammed sideways. It crashed right into an uncharted ridge of jagged limestone. The reef sliced the bottom of the hull wide open like it was nothing. It didn't take long for the reality to hit the bridge. The ship was dying, plain and simple. They were taking on water way too fast to pump out. She was going to slip under in less than an hour. Captain Thorne looked out at the terrified passengers swarming the upper deck. He did the brutal math right then and there. They only had one good lifeboat that could maybe hold 20 people. But there were over 60 souls on board. If a panic broke out, the crowd would rush that single boat and drag everyone down into the freezing black water. Thorne's survival instinct just completely took over. He came up with a sickeningly calm plan to save himself. He ordered his officers to round up the 43rd class passengers and herd them toward the lower cargo hold. He stood right in front of them, looking completely calm. He told them the upper decks were just too dangerous. He promised the reinforced bulkheads down below were the safest place they could be. He swore he'd come back for them once the storm passed. Terrified and desperate for someone to trust, the passengers actually listened. Arthur got caught up in the rush of the crowd and was swept right down into the hold with the rest of them. The second the last person crossed that threshold, Thorne gave a silent signal. The heavy oak door slammed shut behind them. Then came the sound of that iron deadbolt locking them in. While they were trapped, Thorne and his chosen few quietly slipped into the only working lifeboat. They lowered themselves into the freezing black water and just rowed away into the night. They left the ship and everyone inside to sink to the bottom. Meanwhile, down in the dark, the water was rising incredibly fast. It hit their knees, then their waists, and kept climbing. The air in that hold started getting real tight and thin. The screaming down there was a sound Arthur would never be able to forget. It was just absolute primal terror. But Arthur was young, resourceful, and he knew the layout of that ship better than anyone. Arthur knows waiting at that door is a straight-up death sentence. He reaches deep into his soaked coat and pulls out a heavy iron wrench. It's just a tool for the cargo scales, but right now, it's his only way out. Gripping the wrench, he turns his back on that doomed door. He starts wading through the thrashing crowd toward the rear bulkhead. The freezing water is chest-high now, making every single step a brutal fight. Through the dim lantern light, he scans the groaning iron walls. He remembers this narrow, rusted ventilation shaft that leads up to the exhaust grates. It's incredibly tight, but it's literally their only shot at making it out alive. The water keeps pouring in, drowning out the screams of the trapped passengers. Arthur hits the wall under the grate and yells for help at the top of his lungs. He waves the wrench, desperately trying to get someone's attention. Two guys break away from the panic and fight their way over to him. One's Cole, this massive, broad-shouldered blacksmith. The other is Finn, a terrified teenage deckhand who's barely holding it together. The water is up to their necks now, freezing and relentless. Together, they take turns smashing that iron wrench against the rusted bolts of the grate. The whole ship groans and tilts hard, dragging the bow under. With one last desperate heave from Cole, the rusted grate finally snaps. They scramble to pull themselves up into the narrow shaft. Just as they clear the opening, the ocean completely swallows the hold below them. Inside that pitch-black shaft, they clawed their way up in absolute terror. The roar of thousands of gallons of water flooding the lower decks echoes right beneath them. The freezing water is right at their heels, threatening to drag them back down. The ship lurches hard, starting its final plunge to the ocean floor. They reach the top grate, push it open, and spill out onto the sloping rear deck. The hurricane wind hits them like a freight train, and the ship is almost totally vertical. Without saying a word, the three of them scramble up the railing. They throw themselves off the edge, plunging straight into the freezing, chaotic Atlantic. They hit the churning black water, just as the ship disappears beneath the waves. When Arthur finally breaks the surface, he's just gasping for air in the pitch black. The ship is completely gone. All that's left is a massive graveyard of churning debris. He manages to spot a massive shattered piece of the ship's wooden mast floating in the waves. He swims over and just throws his arms around it, holding on for dear life. A few seconds later, Cole and Finn break the surface right next to him. They fight through the massive swells and grab onto the wood too. It's just the three of them now. They spend the entire night clinging to that shattered mast while the hurricane just batters them. They're blinded by salt, freezing to death and shivering so hard their teeth are practically cracking. But they refuse to let go. And when morning finally breaks, the storm is gone. The ocean is completely calm, but it's terrifyingly empty. There's no sign of the captain's lifeboat anywhere. They are entirely alone out there. They drift for 2 agonizing days under a punishing sun. Their bodies are just screaming for fresh water. The sunburned, totally exhausted, and right on the edge of passing out. Just when they think it's over, the current pushes them into the shallows of this uncharted limestone reef. But it's barely even an island. There's no sand, no trees, nothing. Just razor-sharp volcanic rock baking in the sun. They drag themselves out of the water and collapse onto the unforgiving stone. Sure, they survived the sinking, but now they've basically traded a quick death by drowning for a slow, agonizing death by exposure. Arthur lies there on the sharp rocks, totally drained. But he reaches inside his soaked coat to check his pocket. Wrapped up tight in waterproof oilskin, the ship's official logbook and his fountain pen are still perfectly safe. As days turn into weeks out on that rock, the real nightmare begins. They try everything to survive, like catching tiny drops of rain in the hollows of the stone. But they have no food, no real water, and zero shelter from that brutal sun. They manage to trap a few small crabs hiding in the rocks. They eat them raw, just to get something in their stomachs. The shark shells tear at their cracked lips, but they don't care. It's barely enough to keep them breathing. Finn is the first one to break. The kid is just driven completely mad by the dehydration. He crawls over to one of the stagnant tide pools baking in the sun, and he just starts drinking the salt water. Arthur and Cole see what he's doing and rush over. They grab him, begging him to stop. They pull him away from the pool, but he fights them. The damage is already done. Within 2 days, the salt just destroys his body. He's consumed by this violent fever and total delirium. He spends his last hours crying out for his mom. And then Cole manages to hold on for another week. He's a big guy, and he's not going down without a fight. He wades into the shallows with a sharp piece of debris. He's actually trying to spear a small reef shark. But as he strikes, his foot slips on the coral. He goes down hard against the jagged reef. The razor-sharp rock slices his leg wide open. Out here, a mistake like that is a death sentence. In that warm, stagnant water, the wound gets infected almost instantly. They have no medicine, no bandages, and no clean water. A brutal fever takes hold of him fast. The strongest guy on the ship is suddenly completely helpless. Arthur just sits beside him, totally helpless. He holds Cole's hand as the infection shuts his body down. Cole takes his last breath right there on the rocks. And just like that, Arthur is the only one left. By day 14, Arthur is the only human being left alive. His body is just a map of pure suffering. His skin is blistered and peeling from the sun. He's starving, and he knows he's going to die out there. But Arthur has this one burning obsession keeping him going. He manages to catch a seabird just to keep his heart beating. He knows rescue is impossible, but he absolutely refuses to let Captain Thorne get away with murder. Every day, Arthur drags himself into whatever tiny patch of shade he can find. He pulls out that waterproof oilskin pouch he'd kept strapped to his chest. Inside is the ship's official leather logbook and a brass fountain pen. He opens the heavy leather cover and just starts writing. He documents every single detail of the doomed voyage. He writes about the rotting lifeboats, the illegal cargo, and Thorne's absolute arrogance. He puts down a minute-by-minute account of the sinking. He describes the exact sound of that iron deadbolt sliding into place. He lists the names and hometowns of all 39 people locked in the dark and documents how Finn and Cole died. Eventually, his fountain pen runs completely dry. But Arthur isn't going to let that stop him. He finds a small piece of bird bone and sharpens it against the jagged volcanic rocks. Driven by pure willpower, he takes that sharpened bone and he actually uses his own blood as ink. He refuses to let the truth die with him, so he just keeps writing. At this point, it's not a logbook anymore. It's a blood-stained testament. His final entry is hauntingly clear. He writes that he's leaving this record not for his own salvation, but for the absolute damnation of Captain Silas Thorne. Knowing he doesn't have much time left, Arthur carefully wraps the journal back up in the thick oilskin. He binds it as tight as he can with a piece of heavy sail twine he'd saved from their raft. He drags his failing body up to the highest point of the limestone reef. He finds this deep, narrow fissure in the rock, totally shielded from the wind in the high tide, and he wedges the bundle deep inside that natural vault. With his mission finally complete, Arthur just lies down on the jagged rocks. He closes his eyes, surrenders to the elements, and lets the ocean take him. While Arthur's bones bleached under the sun, Captain Thorne was living a very different reality. 2 weeks later, he was picked up by a passing British freighter. He wept openly as he stepped onto the rescue ship, weaving an absolute masterpiece of a lie. He spun this absolute masterpiece of a lie. He told the papers a rogue wave just shattered the hull in an instant. Claimed he was the last man off the ship, thrown into the water by the force of it going down. And the world bought it completely. The shipping company backed him up, mostly because they didn't want to have anyone looking into those rotting lifeboats. So instead of a trial, Thorne got medals of valor. He retired with a massive pension and lived out his days in total luxury, just sitting by a warm fire in a sprawling mansion, sipping fine brandy. He eventually died peacefully of old age, never facing a single consequence. To cement his fake legacy, the town put up this massive bronze statue right in the harbor square. They literally built a monument to honor a coward. And for 140 years, that was the accepted truth. Generations walked right past that statue, completely clueless. The real story of the Aethelgard was buried at the bottom of the ocean. Arthur Pendleton and the people locked in that hold were just forgotten. But the ocean has a funny way of giving back what it takes. Fast forward to today, a team of marine biologists anchors near this remote, unnamed limestone reef in the North Atlantic. It's the exact same rock where Arthur died. While they're surveying the high points, one of the researchers spots something weird. Wedged deep inside a narrow rock fissure is this unnatural, hardened shape. She grabs a pair of long tongs and carefully reaches into the dark crevice. She pulls out this tightly bound package of cracked oilcloth. The dry rock vault basically acted like a perfect time capsule. They bring the bundle back to the research vessel's lab. Everyone is just holding their breath. With extreme care, they cut away the petrified sail twine that's been holding it together for over a century. When they peel back that thick oilskin, they're absolutely stunned. Inside is a heavy leather maritime journal. The pages are warped and stained, but the handwriting is still perfectly legible. The journal was immediately handed over to maritime historians and forensic conservationists. As they started translating that cramped, desperate handwriting, their blood ran cold. The accepted history of the Aethelgard was about to violently unravel. They read Arthur's meticulous notes about the rotting lifeboats and the dangerously overloaded cargo. They saw the exact names of the 39 victims, perfectly matching the historical passenger manifests. Then they read the horrific, detailed account of the captain locking the third-class passengers in the hold. The truth was absolute, undeniable, and completely devastating. Finally, they analyzed the rust-colored ink on those final pages. Forensic testing confirmed what they already feared. Those last entries were indeed written in human blood. The release of Arthur's journal sent massive shockwaves through the historical community. Descendants of the locked passengers had grown up believing their ancestors died in a tragic accident. Now they suddenly realized their great-grandparents were actually murdered by a coward. Emotional justice, delayed for over a century, was swift and uncompromising. Under immense public pressure, the town council voted unanimously to erase the legacy of the false hero. In the dead of night, a heavy crane was brought into the historic harbor square. Heavy industrial straps were wrapped tightly around the bronze neck of Captain Silas Thorne. The monument that had stood unchallenged for 140 years was finally about to fall. With the grinding groan of heavy machinery, the statue was violently ripped from its pedestal. It was hauled away in the dark, destined to be melted down into scrap metal. In its place, they erected a simple, heavy slab of black granite. It bore the names of the 39 passengers, along with Cole, Finn, and Arthur Pendleton. Etched at the bottom was Arthur's final quote about the ocean's justice. Arthur didn't survive that reef, but his truth did. He weaponized his suffering to reach across a century and expose a monster. Could you have documented your own demise to reveal a betrayal? Let me know below and subscribe to Surviving the Impossible. The ocean is a massive, indifferent vault that swallows history without a second thought. For over a century, it kept the Aethelgard buried in the freezing dark. But the tide has a terrifying way of returning what was stolen. The harbor square feels completely different now without the looming shadow of Captain Thorne. That massive granite pedestal just sits there empty. It's a stark reminder that false legacies always crumble eventually. Today, Arthur's blood-stained journal rests safely behind glass in the Maritime Museum. The cracked pages draw thousands of visitors who want to witness this ultimate act of defiance. It's a true testament to human endurance. Outside, people gather around the new black granite monument to pay their respects. They trace their fingers over the deeply etched names of the passengers. They aren't just forgotten statistics anymore. Arthur's story forces us to confront an uncomfortable question about our own breaking points. Faced with absolute isolation and certain death, most of us would probably surrender. But Arthur weaponized his final breaths. It takes an almost incomprehensible level of mental toughness to document your own demise. He knew he'd never live to see the journal found. Could you have maintained that presence of mind to expose him? The weight of Arthur's choice really resonates if you've ever felt silenced by those in power. His words reached across a century to grab history by the throat. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. History is filled with hidden narratives, buried beneath the waves or locked in forgotten vaults. Cynical but true, the line between hero and villain is usually drawn by whoever survives. If you want to hear more unbelievable stories, you're in the right place. We're going to keep diving into the darkest corners of the past to bring these lost voices back. Make sure to subscribe to Surviving the Impossible and hit the bell icon. The world is an unpredictable place. You never know when you might find yourself facing the wild, relying on nothing but your own will to survive. Until next time, respect the ocean and remember the name Arthur Pendleton. The tide is always turning. When you look out at the ocean, it's easy to see just water. But beneath those waves are thousands of stories locked away in the dark. The sea is a master at keeping secrets. Some of those stories are just tragedies of nature. But others, like the Aethelgard, are tragedies of human cruelty. 39 people were left in the dark by a man they trusted. It took over a century for the truth to surface. It took the unbreakable will of one young man on a dying rock. He traded his last breaths to make sure the truth survived. Arthur didn't just survive long enough to write a journal. He survived long enough to rewrite history. He tore down a false hero and shattered a century-old lie. Now, those 39 forgotten souls finally have their names back. The new monument stands as a promise that they won't be erased again. Justice was delayed, but it wasn't denied. It makes you wonder what else is out there, waiting to be found. What other lies are we walking past every day? History is written by the survivors, but sometimes the dead get the final word. The truth is incredibly patient. It doesn't care about bronze statues, pensions, or medals of valor. It just waits in the dark until the time is right. So the next time you hear a story of perfect, flawless heroism, take a second look. The real heroes are usually the ones who never made it home.
They're the ones who fought in the shadows.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into history's darkest corners. If you appreciate these stories of survival and truth, leave a like and share your thoughts. We've got plenty more mysteries waiting to be uncovered. We'll keep searching the depths for the stories that deserve to be told. Until then, stay curious, respect the wild, and never stop questioning the narrative.
I'll see you in the next one.